Welcome to another edition of the Power Connector podcast with our special guest today, Ankur Rungta, co-CEO and founder of C3 Industries based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Chris Ostrowski, chief technical officer and co-founder of Dutchie. A special podcast and interview today with two friends, also two experts in the cannabis industry, really as service providers, owner-operators. They're touching every aspect of this industry, moving it forward. And I can't think of two better folks to have on this initial cannabis-focused podcast in considering your expertise, what you bring to this industry, the knowledge base, the people that you've touched over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and really driving this industry forward, not only in the state of Michigan, but federally as well. Dutchie, the largest point of sale company in the country, servicing north of 6,600.
Yeah.
That number pretty accurate today. And Ankur, 30 or more retail doors, 30 retail doors.
31 right now.
And 5 states?
6 states.
6 states. Okay. So,
Shorted.
yeah. By the way, hold on to your seats for this particular episode. It's gonna be a lot of fun. I don't really have much structure here. Don't need it. You guys are friends. You guys are experts in the industry. For those sometimes joining our podcast, watching or listening, I've sat down with some incredible people and experts at what they do, whether they're in development, building corporate cultures, raising capital. You guys have touched all of that in this exciting, I can't really call it an emerging industry anymore. It's here and it's here to stay. And so to understand a little bit about what you do on the day-to-day, how you impact this industry, how you impact your teams. You're talking about hundreds, 1,000 people work for your company. And so would love to get a little perspective from you both, learn a little bit about what the state of the industry is from your view. And then if we can pass on some knowledge to the audience, that's what this is all about. So I guess I'll just start with a fun question. I like to start most, if not all of my conversations with what's new and exciting. You guys tell me.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm happy to start here. Well, first, thanks for having me on, having us on. Always great to sit and talk about an industry that clearly we're very, very passionate about. New and exciting, especially at Dutchie. You can't really be a technology leader, technology executive if you're not talking about AI in some form, right? So we're really excited to be doing a lot more on the machine learning front. There's obviously, it's like every day, every week, something in the technology landscape is changing, or the software development landscape is changing due to advancements in things like generative AI and large language models. At Dutchie, we're kind of like really, really in the lab right now, enhancing some of the features we rolled out at the end of last year with Dutchie 2.0, really leveraging the vast amount of data that we have available, and the data that our customers have trusted us with for a number of years, helping them leverage that to build more efficient businesses, to build a better consumer experience, and then focusing this year more on how can we bring more generative AI technologies into our offering, into our products. So everything is really exciting right now. It's super dynamic. If you're in the world of software development right now, like I said, every single week there's a new advancement, there's a new thing for you to be focusing on and looking at. So for us, it's just trying to be a good provider, working with our top tier customers like C3 and the team there to understand how can we leverage kind of this new frontier, this new horizon, and bring serious enterprise value to our customers with that type of technology. So that's a big focus for us. And then of course, just continuing to serve our customers as best we can, help them with their growing businesses.
I mean, your customers have made significant investments in their communities, in their state, in this industry, and many of them come to this industry, maybe not Ankur, but others. They really don't embrace technology, right? This has been we call it the OG kind of introduction to the space, and a partnership with Dutchie and the educational and background, but the tools that you help them with is really what can help them advance their investment here and bring back some returns.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, as you see, and really any emergent market mature, a lot of the things that, let's say, more established traditional businesses, especially when you consider a retail, space, a lot of the things that you have to be doing and paying attention to, like, business analytics, like finding efficiency, like retaining customers, attracting customers, building great, programs around, customer loyalty. That's still a, let's say, developing skill. for a lot of our retail customers
Mm.
in this space. We see a trend right now where a lot of businesses that kind of had, crazy amounts of capital injected into them, are realizing some, earlier than others that they have to change their operating model and they do have to become experts in areas where, previously that wasn't necessarily something that was top of mind for them. You use the term cannabis OG. What's really amazing and interesting about this industry for us, right, is kind of the transition from, let's call the legacy market into the regulated market. And not many individuals that were running those maybe legacy operations had to pay much attention to, well, what is my ultimate net margin looking like? How am I understanding my cost of goods sold? How am I running a efficient inventory operation? How am I making sure that my vendors are getting paid or my vendors are paying me? All of these things that frankly were, I think, at the emergence of this industry, and it's different for every single state, they weren't priorities. And I think a lot of operators are learning maybe the hard way that they have to be now. And what we want to do at Dutchie is make kind of that education process as easy, as efficient as we can. And you'll probably hear me, talk about generative AI, talk about large language models a lot today. We think there's an amazing opportunity where we do have a attentive and captive, customer base that's asking us for help. And I think historically you would want to make recommendations for maybe, hey, you should build up your BI team or you should go hire some data analysts. But again, it's a dynamic landscape. It's a dynamic industry. A lot of, operators, the change in kind of their own business metrics happens so fast that the prospect of going out and trying to hire an advanced BI team to really understand how can I run a much more efficient business, it's not really on the table. So they want to turn to Dutchie. They want to turn to their technology providers and say, hey, can you help me just understand what's happening inside of my business? And what's amazing is the emergence of things like conversational analytics, like generative AI, where we can really leverage automation and we can leverage really deep insights where somebody that maybe they don't have a historical background in just looking at a spreadsheet or looking at data in an analytical way, right? We can kind of create a narrative for them. They can wake up every morning as a CEO, as a founder, and understand in a narrative format what's happening in my business today and what should I be focusing on. That's where there's a lot of excitement internally at Dutchie right now, where we're going to bring some of those technologies to bear.
So the time for paper and pen and writing things down that way is long gone for a lot of these operators, right? They have to get up to date with the tech.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of operators, especially where we see consolidation happening more and more. There's just too much data. I certainly believe that empires can be built on spreadsheets, but you see that few and far between these days. So yeah, there's so much information, and just making sense of it is a very, very difficult thing to do. I think the team at C3 have some of the best data analysts and BI people that we work with at Dutchie. But even then, a growing organization, in multiple states, it's hard to keep your arms around it and really understand at a deep level, how do we optimize this? Where do we need to make changes throughout our business?
Yeah. Ankur, how have you been able to navigate the state to state activation? My understanding is every state is kind of like its own country when it comes to applying for licenses and what their legislators and regulators have agreed to. So kind of understanding, you started this business in 2017 with just you and your brother, and you have 1,000 employees, 6 states, more than 30 retail stores. You're an attorney by trade, so understanding spreadsheets and understanding a little bit about what was exciting to this industry. What drew you in, and what have you been able to learn?
Yeah,
from last years?
I think just to address what Chris is talking about, I think that the industry is maturing more broadly, as Chris said, and I think regardless of what background companies, founders or executives come from, there's just a shift in mindset that's happening in the industry from an almost exclusive focus and prioritization on growth to more of an optimization type of mindset now. And it's not surprising. As you see an industry start to evolve and get more competitive and growth start to plateau or taper off, that's a natural sort of pivot and evolution for companies to make. And so certainly for us, I think we are much more focused on optimization and sort of dialing in the different pieces of our business and the right use of technology and analytics now than we were 12 or 18 or 24 months ago. And that's just, again, in nature of our own company's evolution, but also where the space is at. We're at a time and place now where you can no longer just win a license, turn on an asset and expect to make a lot of money. I think you need to have a more refined approach and strategy than that. And so I think there's just this ongoing mindset shift that's happening throughout the industry. And I think it's true of small companies, medium-sized companies, large companies. I think everybody's going through some version of this, adjustment of priorities and a realization that in a competitive landscape, if you're not dialing in all these pieces, you're just not going to be successful long-term. And so just to kind of, touch on what Chris is talking about, I think, beyond that for us, being in 6 states now, it's absolutely a complex business. I think that, also highlights the need for the right use of technology and analytics and data. And so we are absolutely looking at each state from a totally individual market standpoint. Market dynamics are totally different. Regulatory frameworks are different. Our own business is different in each state, meaning we may have one state where we have a large retail business and we're not vertical. Some we are vertical, some we have smaller platforms and that has a different look and feel to it. So it is very challenging. I think it's part of what creates barriers to entry and scaling these businesses is being able to navigate those complex dynamics. I do think what I'm realizing more and more is you need to be very careful of not having a shallow presence in a state. I think for us, we're no longer wanting to enter a market and just have a couple of licenses there, a couple of assets. We're really trying to build depth into these markets. And then if there's a market where we're not able to build depth for whatever reason, then it may not be the right market for us long term. I think we're all kind of in this reprioritization. We're also saying, what should we focus on in terms of markets? What are our strengths? Where can we be profitable and successful? And if there's parts of our business where we can't be successful and we can't be profitable, then we need to recognize that and think hard about what we want to do with those pieces of our business.
What do you like most about the Michigan market?
I've always said to me, it's the most dynamic marketplace in the country. Still, I think one of the largest, if not the largest, in terms of spend per capita annually. Prices are very low. Consumers have tons of options. There's lots of high quality products and innovation out there. So it's still an incredibly dynamic market. It's, I think, in some ways, in my view, one of the greatest success stories in the industry. It obviously has challenging elements to it as well with the level of competition and some of the price compression that's happened. But, in some ways, I think the future of the industry is going to look a lot like Michigan. And so anyone who's like, this is a Michigan specific phenomenon, I disagree. I think that this is where things are going to be headed. Now, it may happen at different speeds in different markets. But I think it's important that we all, as MSOs or companies that are in the space, we need to learn how to be successful in markets like Michigan. And if we are successful in markets like Michigan, then how do we take those learnings and apply them in other marketplaces? But to me, I don't think you can really avoid the Michigan type of dynamic. You kind of have to embrace it and figure out how you're going to compete in a market like this.
And I think that's pretty telling too. I think to think about MSOs a little bit. Obviously, C3 starting out, Michigan and really blossoming outwards. It seems that none of the MSOs, and especially more the public ones, have had any real success getting into the Michigan market. What do you think about when you reflect on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe some of the largest MSOs have not had success here. I think there's a new breed of mid-sized MSOs that has had some success here. I think we're one of those groups. But yeah, I think that there were, this is a marketplace that's not predicated. Success is not predicated on control of licenses and market share, and like a lot of states are. It's a much more competitive environment. And so certainly it matters. Do you have the right stores in the right places? Have you built the right production facilities with the right cost of production? So there's certainly those structural elements that you would want to have to be successful here. But beyond that, it's much more of an open marketplace with real competition. And so, if that's not what your business is designed for, then it may not work out well for you. And so yeah, I think it has been challenging for a lot of the MSOs, and many of them have just avoided it. So it's not even that a lot have come here and failed. The vast majority haven't really even tried. And so this just speaks to the different types of businesses out there and the different business models and how people are looking to approach the space. But again, if you believe like I do that the era of like these sort of limited license controlled markets is going to start to fade away, and you have competition from other verticals like hemp products and all that, then I think, again, we're going to have to all compete. I view it as a very competitive, hyper competitive sort of environment, regardless of what state you're in. But I'm excited about Michigan. I hope that the state can find a healthy equilibrium. I think that's really the critical piece of this, is where can we land that's going to be great for the consumer and, allow for a healthy functioning industry. Because I think there's always a balance between those two things. Sometimes if things are too in favor of the consumer and products have gotten too cheap, then you have a unhealthy industry that has a lot of turmoil and disruption. Obviously, you can have a scenario that's the other end of the spectrum, where it's really great for industry and there's fat margins, but it's not great for customers because prices are high, availability is limited or whatever. So I think it's about striking a balance between those things. And I think Michigan, I think we just need to find a way to get to a little bit of a healthier industry because I think things are really strong for the consumer in a good way.
Yeah, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about a little bit more federal national policy. New president in office. With that comes optimism and hope, maybe for less regulation. Chris, your customers and clients are all over the country.
Sure.
Where does government get in the way of them being successful as retailers and operators in the space?
Oh boy, I mean, can
we start pointing fingers?
Big topic and well discussed. I think I like to think about this in terms of just time horizons, right? And trying to kind of match likelihood of change. We at Dutchie, really with a handful of industry partners, trying to lead the charge on rescheduling, right? Just getting, the 280E tax treatment taken off, our customers just dramatically changes everybody's business. So when we think federal, you want to be realistic, right? You don't want to kind of swing for the fences all at once. So there is a sense of incrementality that we want to take with it. Obviously, the timelines that I think we all expected on rescheduling, haven't quite panned out. But even so, there's still a lot of optimism that getting cannabis rescheduled from a category 1 to category 3 will happen. We saw some maybe influence over the process that wasn't ideal, and in many ways was frankly inappropriate. We want a real democratic and judicious process to happen when we're looking at where the industry was at from getting that ALJ process done. Delaying that, we think, was the right move. We want to take the best bet that we can with a new administration, with a new, head of DEA. So there's a lot of optimism still. It's definitely a delay, but zooming all the way out, we want to be optimistic about the new administration, and I think there's lots of reason to be optimistic. It's probably too early, kind of in the, whether it's different confirmation hearings process, or just where the current administration's focus is at. But there's a lot of discourse right now inside the industry and amongst industry leaders that are pointing towards, we should have optimism. And frankly, what's the alternative? That we kind of continue to lick our wounds and stay pessimistic about the future. I don't think anybody's signing up for that reality. So we're hopeful that under a new administration, there can be different avenues, there can be a different level of discourse and focus. Even the topic of debanking, which is something that we've talked about a lot. There's just a whole world of cannabis business operators that are constantly being thrown back by, I think, realities that most Americans don't know exist. The idea that a cannabis operator, whether it's the actual business entity or the individual, can lose access to banking for activity that is state sanctioned is frankly it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And there does need to be change, on just that topic alone. So access to the traditional financial system, the banking system, is a major step forward. A rescheduling process that is fair and equitable, that can land on the kind of common sense ruling that I think we all Americans, for the most part, would agree is common sense, is something that we want to see happen, and we'll push as fast as we can. And I think what gives me optimism personally, historically, this industry has not done a great job of working together. Whether it was maybe a sense of pride, of ownership, or ego, or we're going to be the ones to get this done, we have not seen the level of coordination amongst the large operators and even the smaller operators that we have seen in the past probably 6 months, where I think the reality has hit that you just can't affect change for a $35-40 billion industry alone. So the coordination that we're seeing with companies like C3, with some of the public MSOs, that's brand new, and that gives me some real optimism and hope that we're gonna as an industry be able to start working together better and affect some real change.
Well, Dutchie has definitely led from the front on that issue nationally. Ankur, I know you have a seat at the table, and you talk to us a little bit about your work with the NAR and what your focus might be for the next 6 months. I mean,
No, I think it was just announced that National Cannabis Roundtable and the USCC, United States Cannabis Council, are merging, which I think is an important step for the industry. I think to Chris's point, there has been a problem of the industry not speaking with one voice historically. There have been multiple lobbying organizations. There have been companies that have their own GA efforts. And so I think there's a desire now among the largest companies and the medium-sized companies and some of the technology companies that are really important in the space to try to find alignment and speak with one voice. I think the reality is, in order to move the needle, we all need to kind of be rowing in one direction. It's a heavy lift to get something done, I think, federally for this industry. And it only makes it that much tougher if we're not, fully aligned and coordinated in messaging and strategy. Look, I think it's a new administration, as you said. It's new control of Congress and the presidency. I think it's a time we have to look at what we've done historically and ask ourselves if it's worked or not. Not only do we have a new audience that we're sort of talking to and new sort of key people that are in key positions of power, but we also have a pretty unsuccessful several years that we're coming off of in terms of federal lobbying for the industry. So to me, there's a lot of important conversations happening, not only about combining these organizations, but also what are we going to then do going forward? What are our strategies? How are we talking to people? What are we messaging? Because it is a very different ballgame now than it was, a few months ago under the old administration. There are different priorities in the new administration. There are different talking points that they're focused on, and so we have to be smart. We can't use the same messaging that hasn't worked or that was designed for a different audience. We have to adjust and evolve, and so I think it's a critical point for us. I'm not sure how hopeful or optimistic to be, honestly. I think we'll see how it plays out. It's definitely very early right now to be making any predictions. I would say that it is more and more critical for the industry that something does happen. I think we're past the point of saying we really want this, it would be great, and it would really help our industry grow, and it would help these businesses thrive, to now saying, if we don't get these things, many of these businesses won't survive. And so I think we just have to also be very realistic about what we're saying and how we're talking about it. I think we can't put rose-colored glasses on and spin it in an unreasonably optimistic way. I think the reality is there are many companies that are facing significant distress, credit maturities. As I said earlier, the space is getting very, very competitive. So if this industry has to, be sort of shackled with unreasonable types of regulations or treated in a way that's very different than any other industry while there's so much competition, it's going to be very hard for us. If we have to pay more for capital than everybody else, it's going to be hard for us. If we can't access the U.S. capital markets, it's going to be hard for us. If we have to compete with unregulated products that are sort of widely available in the market while we're dealing with all these other issues, it's going to be really hard for us. And so I think, to me, I'm just trying to be a little bit more blunt than I have been in the past and a little bit more honest. And and just say, guys, this is a sort of turning into a matter of life and death now for the industry. And I would say to the policymakers, if the industry ends up not doing well, the licensed THC markets in the States, if you sort of allow that industry to, end up in a bad place, then what you're left with is a very unregulated marketplace, which is what we've always been, I think, trying to get away from. I think the whole idea has always been
That's what you invested in.
Yeah, not just us as companies, but I mean, I think from a policy standpoint, the goal of these legislators was to bring this industry into the light of day, into the regulated channels, create safe products for people, create tax revenue for these states. And there was a whole package, sort of a regulatory package and framework that was envisioned, regardless of how some states have done it different than others. There's still, I think, broad policy vision here of like, let's bring this market into the regulated world and let's make it safe and accessible, and let's do the research and let's figure out how to use these products the right way. And unfortunately, if we allow the licensed THC market to sort of wither away and we don't provide any relief, then you're going to almost be right back to where you started, which is effectively an unregulated or sort of / illicit marketplace. And so I think for the policymakers, I think it's really just a question of, is that where you want to land ultimately after all this work has gone into this at the state level? Or do you want to sort of encourage this regulated marketplace to thrive, to continue to evolve, and ultimately to build a very healthy industry in the U.S. And I would just say, as a secondary matter, because we're stuck in this sort of limbo from a regulatory standpoint, if you look at a lot of U.S. companies, not only can we not access the capital markets properly, we're now starting to miss out on international opportunities, right? If you look at what's happening internationally, a lot of the Canadian LPs are taking advantage of that. U.S. companies are still largely blocked out because of our regulatory status. A lot of the work that's happening in the true medical space from an R&D standpoint, a lot of the largest MSOs have no ability to really participate in that. And so while we're stuck in this kind of limbo, the rest of the world is advancing and moving beyond us. And so again, just what, if I were a U.S. policymaker, I would say, well, I want the international worldwide cannabis industry to really be based out of the U.S. and for U.S. companies to be the dominant players in that global landscape. And we may miss the boat if we don't get our shit together relatively soon.
To your point about a regulated marketplace that's equal and fair, I guess we kind of have to talk about hemp-derived products and what that's doing, and the access that children have to go online and order a product that they don't have to sign for, that's untested, unregulated. Chris, can you explain, I guess let's just talk to the policymakers that are hopefully watching this, what they can learn about this problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's first and foremost, I think it's important to call it what it is, right? It is taking advantage of a loophole that was created in 2015 in the Farm Bill. I think it's a super hot topic in the cannabis industry right now. You certainly have established operators that made large investments in the regulated industry, and I think, of course, those capital holders, those equity holders, they want to see that investment mature and realize. But I think there's also, more of the goal of what, Ankur was just talking about, which is the vision of a framework for a safe product. There's a reason why that vision had such strong support. In just American polling data, right? People want to see this happen. I think if you position the question of, do you want recreational cannabis? And then change that question to, do you want that recreational cannabis to be untrustworthy and untested? And I think that's a big part of this debate right now, which is, not that we should necessarily think to just block out or keep out hemp and hemp-derived products because it comes from a loophole. I think it's really more of a question of, do you want to have a sustainable market that has consumer trust? And that's a big concern for me right now, is that we're kind of placing our bets that a capitalist entity, which would be a business producing hemp products, is going to self-regulate. And I think there are dozens and dozens of examples of that formula not working out. And as a consumer, as a person who's passionate about, the healing effects of this plant, and frankly, as a father of young children, I know that this is something I don't necessarily want my 10-year-old to be experimenting with. And I think that's, again, another issue when we're talking about a vision for a regulatory framework. I think it's an easy statement to say, I'm not aware of any American parent that wants, their 10-year-old consuming alcohol. And guess what? That's illegal. What we have in this country right now is an environment where a 10-year-old could go online. They could order, hemp-derived products. It could show up on their front door with no signature, no 21 or over requirement. And at no point did anybody break a law. And I think that's a stunning example of, when regulation becomes too myopic and too focused on, whether it's, well, this was the policy that was most important to us at this point in time. And then the argument counter to, well, this loophole exists and it's now created a industry that's estimated to be anywhere from 10 to 30 billion dollars. I think that we have to make a decision as citizens to say this is not, an environment that we feel comfortable with. So aside from any economic incentives that, of course, myself or Ankur or others who have invested in the regulatory industry, hemp is a scary product because it's just something that I don't believe should just have completely unblocked access to it. It needs to be something that has guidelines, has some level of regulation on it, and I think that's really where the debate should be at right now.
Yeah, there's unintended consequences of broad legislation and actions that can happen.
Yeah, if I could just jump in
Please,
here.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I look at it from a couple different standpoints. I think from a policy standpoint, as I think about how this country operates, we typically regulate psychoactive products that we sell in the marketplace. So whether that's prescription drugs, alcohol, whether you put tobacco in that category, other drugs, they're typically regulated. We typically don't sell psychoactive products in this country without significant regulation. And so from a policy standpoint, it was certainly within the federal government's powers to say, we want to allow these products to be made and put out a regulatory framework and decide, hey, if we want to allow hemp-derived psychoactive cannabinoids to be out there, here's how we're going to do it. To sort of see an industry spring up off the back of a loophole where that was not the intended consequence, I think that's part of the concern that you're hearing here is that we don't typically put these products out this way, and this was not the intended goal of that legislation. It was frankly the result of sloppy drafting. And so I think that from a policy standpoint, you ask yourself, is this how we typically approach things in America in terms of these types of products? No, I don't think so. And then I think beyond that, from an industry standpoint, I think the way I look at it is, look, I don't begrudge somebody that's out in this industry trying to build a business, trying to build a brand. I understand why people are doing it. But I think from our standpoint in the licensed THC markets, I think we are really looking for a level playing field. And I think what we're saying is, look, if you're telling us that a psychoactive cannabinoid that's derived from this type of cannabis plant must go through all these processes and steps and licensing and regulation in order to come to the market, but effectively what's the equivalent product that comes from a slightly different plant source is now able to be out there in an unregulated channel, that's what starts to feel very inconsistent. And I think for those of us that are playing in the state license frameworks, you feel like how can this be okay that there could be a equivalent product out there in an unregulated fashion? And so I think there's both the policy question of, do we really want to have psychoactive products out there in an unregulated manner, whether it's for children or maybe for adults that don't know what they're using and aren't aware of, their high dose products out there. There's all kinds of stuff going on. And so I think it's not what we want from a policy standpoint, and certainly from the industry standpoint, it feels sort of unfair. And so I do think it's a really hot topic. I don't think hemp products are going away. So I think, we really, from a practical standpoint, have to ask ourselves, well, what are we going to do going forward? How are we going to regulate these products? Are we going to allow there to be these two sort of distinct separate channels, one regulated, one largely unregulated? That doesn't feel very sort of it feels pretty tenuous to me. It feels like there's a lot of tension there. We see a lot of states now making efforts to sort of, regulate these products, because if the federal government's not going to do it and states see these products, flooding into their markets, then they may take action. So you're going to end up with, again, a patchwork sort of framework. And I just think we need to clean all this stuff up. I think it's not good for the industry. Sure, there may be a short-term opportunity in the hemp space to make, unregulated, build an unregulated business that's profitable. But, I would also ask, are those businesses investable? How will the capital markets view a business that's model is predicated on a loophole that could go away? So, if I were in that hemp space, I would also be clamoring, and many of the large companies are, to their credit, they also want some kind of regulation and framework, because they want to know that what they're doing is okay, right? Versus operating in a totally gray area off of a loophole. That, if anyone is building a business, that's not what you want long term.
It's not ideal.
So
I don't think either of us are anti-hemp. I think
no, that's what I'm trying to,
we're anti-loophole.
Yeah,
right?
I think it's more about, what do we want from a policy standpoint? Meaning, how do we want these products to be available in the marketplace? Do we want them to be regulated or not? And then, from an industry standpoint, how do you create a fair playing field? And frankly, we want to, as THC industry participants, we want a level playing field with hemp. And then more broadly, we want a level playing field with all the other industries out there in the world, right? So that there's really two levels for us. It's give us a level playing field within our categories, and then also more broadly, within the U.S. marketplace.
The 280. So
well, not just 280, U.S. capital markets access more broadly. I think it's 280 is a part of it, but the fact that, the largest, most successful companies in the space, and there's some really strong companies, the fact that they cannot list on the U.S. exchanges, while a Canadian cannabis company can list on the U.S. exchanges, or a technology company can access these markets. It doesn't help our industry. It's not good for the U.S. economy. And for anyone that's like a capitalist and wants the U.S. economy to grow, like I think our new administration does, then hopefully they're thinking about it that way.
So how are you garnering support with other MSOs or other leaders across the country? Are you sitting at the table with Dutchie, kind of determining who could be a good fit, who can get in front of new committee members and new congressional leaders?
Yeah, I mean, both of our companies are involved in these organizations, USCC, NCR, which are now merging. We'll both be involved in the new Go Forward combined organization. And I think there are a lot of conversations happening about what is the right approach. Who are the right people that we're engaging with in terms of the right consultants and lobbyists, who are the right, who's the audience that we want to be targeting. Again, very different audience than who we were targeting 6 months ago. And so I think it's critical that we figure these things out and we get it right. And look, I think like any industry, you're trying to create alignment among many different players and constituents that may not see exactly eye to eye on every particular issue, but you're trying to find the areas of overlap where you think you have a chance of success, where there's a receptive audience on the other side among the policymakers, and you got to put that puzzle together. I mean, it's a very complex thing to get this done ultimately, like any piece of it, to get it done. So I'm not sitting here saying, why haven't we gotten it done already? Or the people, trying to, say that we haven't been doing it right. It's just that you're constantly evolving in your approach here. And then when there's a new sheriff in town, you have to adjust your strategy. Right. And like I said earlier, I think it's getting past the point of, hey, we really want this, to kind of like, we need this.
Let's not maybe call it desperation necessarily, but it's driving, some real necessitative change. And yeah, honestly, on the who, right, is the right company, anybody. I think it can't be said enough that historically, since I've been in the industry since really 2018, the coordination it's just non-existent. It's at every single level. I was in the Denver area less than 6 months ago. We hosted a panel. We talked about some of the headwinds facing the Colorado market, and we had a room about 100 local operators. There wasn't any major MSO operator. It was all local, kind of quote unquote, Main Street mom and pop operators. And I simply asked, in the past 2 years, raise your hand if you have talked to your state legislator in any form, if you have participated in a lobbying discussion of any form. Out of the roughly 100 operators that were there, 2 of them raised their hand.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
No.
Right? This industry cannot exist in a bubble. it has to be partnered. I mean, more than any other, really, it has to be partnered with regulators and legislatures. There's just no world where it can exist, on its own and expect growth, expect it to thrive. And I think, to Ankur's point, where it's probably not right to call them competitive, but we had multiple lobbying groups that are now joining forces, and that alone, right, is a big deal because we're just able to more efficiently use our voice, use our resources. And when we start to see, just in the past 6 months, more and more of the large operators, more and more of the influential operators, stacking hands, joining forces, saying, okay, this is serious. We need to make some serious changes right now. That's new. We've never seen that in the industry before.
Yeah, it's smart to do that and think cohesively and strategically about building relationships with every level that you're talking about here, from the mom and pop all the way up to MSOs. I view this problem as a challenge. I also don't think it's high on the priority list for a freshman congressional rep to come in and say, I'm going to be the champion of moving cannabis forward. So I think you go straight to the top. I think you got to go right to the president, and you got to leverage every relationship.
Sure.
He's a pro-business. He wants to reduce regulations and move the country forward. I think you got to find an insider.
Got to find an insider, and I think to Ankur's point, the strategy is always shifting, right? I think in a previous kind of motion, there was a lot of focus on maybe a message that resonated more with the left, right? When we had a different administration, different control of Congress, and I think you'll start to see much more messaging from lobbying groups that aligns, maybe with a little bit more on the right, or middle of the road when we're talking about there's 450,000 Americans that work in this industry. There's billions of dollars invested in this industry. This has to become messaging wise a pro business and pro growth and pro leadership. To your point, I mean, when there's companies based in the UK and based in Israel that are leading the global whether it's research or frankly just wholesale industries, that's something that I think this newer administration, this new Congress will take notice of. I think it's right that hey, there's been congressional members over years that have been loud, and that's been great. But we need to see progress. So every idea is on the table, and there's nobody out there that I think the leadership collectively within cannabis, is not willing to work with to try to affect some sort of change.
Yeah, and I would just say that I think a lot of the things that the industry talks about and wants are very aligned with what the new administration talks about and wants. And so when we think about not only the growth of the industry from a business standpoint, of course, that would help the U.S. economy. That would help with job creation, wealth creation, all these things. I also think that there's a message of states' rights and federalism here, right? We are really, at the end of the day, as MSOs, we're asking the federal government to say that what we're doing in these state markets is legitimate, and that we can now go list our companies on the New York Stock Exchange, right? If we do that. And so we want to preserve the state's markets. We want to preserve a federalism-based approach, right? We want to allow each state to choose how it regulates cannabis. Some may not want it, right? That's up to the rights of those individual states and their voters, right? And so I think, and then of course the public health and public safety element of it. I believe that most Republicans are strong believers in public health and public safety and want to make sure that, products that have potential harmful side effects or that we want to keep away from minors are treated in a certain way. And so I think a lot of what we always have talked about is very, should resonate with this audience. We just have to make sure that we're messaging it correctly and that it's the right people delivering the message. It's the right people hearing the message on the other side. There are people in this new administration that have worked in and around cannabis, including some, senior folks in the new administration from the state of Florida that have a very active background in cannabis and cannabis lobbying. And so I think there's some open-minded people there, but there's of course many priorities, a lot of activity going on right now. So how do we create some urgency around our particular topic? Because like you said earlier, most freshman congressmen aren't,
They're not gonna
going
be a
to,
champion.
going to the mat for this. But with that said, there are actually some very prominent Republicans who are big proponents and sponsors of these bills, but particularly in the House. So we just have to keep pushing. I mean, that these things they're very hard to get done, and if you're not persistent and if you're not willing to put the long-term work in, you're just not going to get there. And so I think, I think it's important for all of us to not feel the fatigue and start to feel like, oh my God, this is never going to happen. And let's not keep trying, or let's not put our resources into it. If anything, like, now's the time where we have to kind of double down, and that's life. I mean, the hardest moments are right before you reach your goal. Right. And so I think for all of us, like, I'm trying to certainly, I'm sure we're going to talk more about Michigan in this conversation too. Like, one of the things that I'm very focused on this year is going to some of my peers and colleagues in Michigan and saying, guys, you need to participate in these efforts. I think Michigan, again, we talked about earlier, such a dynamic market, $3.5 billion, bunch of sizable companies here from a revenue and headcount standpoint. We all need to participate federally. We cannot be caught up in just our little Michigan marketplace and what's going on here, because it's going to matter. We may think it doesn't matter. It matters. And so certainly, like, the folks that have, the more OG style, operators that came in from the legacy market, some of those guys have huge businesses now. And I'm very much in their faces saying, please participate in this. Please contribute. You've got a voice. You've got resources. You got to be part of this conversation. Sitting back, we were not active in these organizations for many years until really the last year or so. And I just don't think that works. I don't think we can free ride. I don't think we can hope that someone else is going to figure it out. I think, we really need all hands on deck, everyone putting resources in. Of course, money is always part of the equation. How do we get this thing done? It's going to require everyone pushing in the same direction.
Yeah, and I think we touched a little bit on things like price compression coming to Michigan and the just hyper competitive market that it is now. Desperation is going to bring change, right? It's going to force those operators who have historically, they're running great businesses, and they're some of the most successful cannabis entrepreneurs and companies, in the entire North America are here in Michigan. There hasn't been that motivator. There hasn't been that motivating factor for them to say, okay, I'm going to start spending, mind share and time, and frankly, money, right? Like, there's, whether we like it or not, putting money forward is one of the most important things that we need this industry to start doing a better job of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would just say, like, part of the Michigan has seen massive growth in recent years. And I think that's, sort of allowed a lot of companies to just focus on Michigan, growing their businesses. I think Michigan's probably going to see some plateauing out here now. I mean, it's already, 2024 over 23 wasn't nearly as strong as previous year growth. I think 25 over 24 is pretty uncertain picture right now. So I think as the market here plateaus out, that's going to create even more pressure on this marketplace in the Michigan industry. And I think hopefully it'll, kind of spark an interest in some of these companies to be more active and participating, to say, hey, we can no longer just assume Michigan is going to grow massively year over year, like, unless we start to fix some of these broader issues. Because I think things like hemp are probably cutting into the Michigan industry. Certainly we're all dealing with 280E still, and the lack of access to reasonably priced capital. So I think Michigan, for $3.5 billion of a $30 billion industry, I mean, we're more than 10% of the whole industry here. So we have to pull 10% or more of our weight at the federal level, right? Like, that's simple math, right? So we have to participate, and we have to pull our weight. Are
you seeing buy-in from some of your colleagues and friends?
Yeah, I think so. I think more so now in the last 3-6 months than I have ever before, when I was just told, no, I'm not. I've got more important things to do. So, yeah, I think so. And I think, look, it's just it goes back to, like, the natural evolution. A lot of people, these business owners have become a lot more sophisticated over the course of growing these massive businesses, and they've learned a ton. I've learned a ton. I mean, just because I was a lawyer or a banker or whatever, doesn't mean that I really knew what the hell I was doing when I started this business, right? So I think as you learn more and you figure out the landscape, and then you start to say, well, what needs to happen for my long-term success, not just my short-term success, and so, yeah, I'm seeing that evolution from us, and seeing it from a lot of other people. But I think it's important, like, when I got involved in these organizations and joining, the boards of these organizations, part of the commitment I was making was, not only will we be involved, but I'm going to go out and bother everybody I know in the industry to try to get them involved, because you got to hear it from your peers. You got to hear it from other people. these things don't put themselves together. Everyone's got to be out selling it.
Right.
And that's how you get 1 + 1 to equal 4, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's got to have a seat at the table.
No, and Dutchie, I mean, Dutchie's leadership on these issues has been there for a long time. So trying to follow their lead a little bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have a broad reach, right? We're in over 6,500 dispensaries in North America. At the end of the day, Dutchie's success is our operator success. So aside from the fact that everybody at Dutchie, I mean, we are a 400 employees and such a mission driven and focused company. We just want to see this industry succeed. So it's been a priority for us. We are very fortunate, that we've prioritized this for a number of years now. But again, it's been tough going at times when we can't build consensus, right? When we can't get, some of the largest and some of the most cash rich, frankly, operators in the industry to want to participate. Alignment is one thing, but just showing up has been a whole nother game that, again, to what Ankur was saying, the past 3 to 6 months, 6 months on maybe, the broader level for us, we are seeing participation. So, participation's the start. Alignment, is where we need to get everybody to. But I think, look, there's a number of the larger federal, footprint companies. They had a bit of a blow, especially with, Florida not passing recreational. The flurry of activity we saw right after that, not sitting back and licking their wounds, saying, all right, that didn't work. What's next? How do we jump into the next action, the next, movement from a group? And, it would have been great for Florida to pass recreational. I think, that would have been a great, signal for the broader discourse in cannabis. But at the same time, I have been really excited to see it, act as a catalyst for a much more focused, constituency of cannabis operators to get together and say, okay, 1 or 2 companies was kind of leading the charge in Florida, didn't get it done, and there was a lot of money spent. How do we prevent that from happening again? How do we start working more and more together? So it's progressing. It's progressing. I'm hoping in the next 3 to 6 months we'll have much more participation. These lobbying efforts, we'll see whether it's more money put into them, but just a broader kind of unified message coming out.
Yeah, it's relationships, right? It all goes back to that. Have you guys been successful in hosting like a DC Capital Day with not just the MSOs, but people, even the mom and pops? Like, what's that experience been?
Yeah,
like
I think both these organizations do a really nice job of that. They do, lobbying days, they do, meetings on the Hill, and they actually bring in a nice cross section of larger companies, smaller companies, mom and pop, in some cases, social equity operators. So, no, I think there's always been, I think, participation from different constituencies. It's just a question of getting broad participation. If you get 20% of the companies to contribute into the trade association, how do you get to 40 or 60 or 80, right? Like that's really the goal. And so, but no, yeah, I think there's been a lot of groundwork laid. I mean, there's been thousands of meetings and conversations had on the Hill, both parties, lots of work's been done, lots of education. Now it's just about finding the formula that's going to ultimately unlock actual movement and action, right? And that formula changes depending on who's in office and who the power players are and, what the issues of the day are. And so, it's a very complicated puzzle to put together. It's like, it's a moving target that you're trying to hit all the time, and you're trying to wrangle a lot of different people and a lot of different interests and constituencies to all kind of gel together at that key moment when something gets passed as legislation. So I'm, it's not, in some ways, it's not surprising that it's taken us a long time because it's very complicated there's
40 some states today, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, we've had far more success at the state level than we had at the federal level. So.
Well, giving people an opportunity and creating something from nothing. I mean, this is like, to me, it's incredible to see the transition of this industry in the last, I would say, 15 years to when the professional framework came together in 18. You guys are certainly at the top of your game as a service provider and a partner and resource to all your customers and, your team, right? You have 1,000 people that you guys are responsible for. So this is America. This is capitalism. Yeah. You're providing an opportunity and a solution that people need and desire. They benefit from it. and you guys are doing your part. I mean, you pay your taxes, you license business. I mean, this is what you're hoping for, a fair seat, like you
Yeah,
said earlier.
no, and I, I think we talk a lot about the challenges, the things that we want to have happen. But yeah, I mean, I think take a step back with where we've come in a fairly short period of time as an industry. I think it's pretty amazing. And I think for me as a business owner and an operator in this space, I'm definitely I'm trying to not think in a short term way. I think one of my gripes about kind of our mindset in this country is like we expect things to happen really quickly in America now. Like we expect all of our businesses to grow overnight and to get to the $1 billion outcome and to take it public or to sell it, or we've been trained to like look for that like immediate gratification and that quick outcome. And listen, if somebody can do that, that's great. I will, that's awesome, but that's not always reality. And so like we're building businesses in an industry that's brick and mortar, that has, a lot of infrastructure that needs to be created. Obviously there's a regulatory piece like we've talked about, but it's going to take time. And, even as business owners, we have to be realistic about how long will something take, what is a reasonable outcome? Because if you're always worried that, hey, this is taking too long or I'm not seeing the outcome I wanted, then then you start to get very negative, right? And you start to think about your business differently. Whereas I would say, look, for us, I mean, to be where we are 7 years in with 1,000 employees and our financial profile, that's amazing. I mean, I would have, it's more than you could ever expect in your wildest dreams in some way, right? So I think it's just good, like, to keep that broader perspective and stay positive and be realistic, of course, but also not have like a view that like everything's going to happen overnight. Because I'll just say, I think in cannabis, there's a lot of that mindset of like, people are getting tired. Why haven't things happened for me already? I thought this was going to be a golden ticket and it was going to change my life overnight. And like, it hasn't played out that way for a lot of people. And that includes big companies and small companies. And so I think as an industry, we have to, sort of, steel ourselves for like a longer process and be, I think, have a little bit, just try to persevere through some of these things and not expect it to just happen for us, but just realize we got to make it happen for ourselves. And it may take a little longer than we wanted, and don't get down or give up, because that's not going to get you. It's not going to make it any easier to get to your goal, right? If you have that mindset. So I do think it's something that I'm preaching a lot of to people is like, try to look at the positive side of things and stay positive, because if you don't, then you may not make it to the other side.
I think we're both cut from the same cloth there, and we have to, it's kind of our job, especially kind of seeing the tea leaves that we see, right? It's our job to inject optimism and be leaders. And frankly, that is leadership. I think one thing I say to my team at Dutchie all the time is, hey, look, there's a million different KPIs, metrics, et cetera, that we can point to that, show the positive trajectory momentum that is still, here, even maybe if some of the kind of the sexiness or the fervor around this industry maybe has died off a little bit. And the question is simply, in 10 years, do you think more people are going to be consuming cannabis or less, right? And I think almost universally, we can all agree that more Americans, more people in the world, will be taking advantage of this plant. I think if you look at the trends in alcohol, you look at the trends in, just individual wellness, cannabis has a major, major role to play in that. And, we have the largest data set in the industry at Dutchie. We service, so many rooftops that we have a pretty good picture of the trends. And while we can see, in isolation, we can see, to Ankur's point, some enterprises, having a rough time. We can see, of course, the impacts of margin loss, of price compression. We can see the impacts of, having to close doors, toxic assets that aren't working anymore. But when we zoom all the way out and we look at, where the trend lines are going, consumers and adoption from a consumer switching into the cannabis substance is up and to the right. And, we fully believe that trend will continue. So it's still an emergent market. I think last sample was something like 15 to 20% of Americans have even tried cannabis in their entire life. that's roughly 80% of an entire country that has yet to even give this substance a shot. And so that's a really exciting um, data point for us to always keep in the back of our heads when we're trying to make sure that we're not getting down, we're not focused on the doldrums, because this is a long game. We're at the frontier of a brand new industry, and frankly, we see that as a privilege, right? The fact that we are in a position that we are in. Of course, there's a lot of pride. To Ankur's point of 7 years into building C3 and having the financial profile that you have, that's an incredible success and something that should be celebrated. Us at Dutchie, we're of course thrilled to have the trust of our customers to continue our leadership here. And again, part of that leadership is showing people that there is a lot of optimism, and there's plenty of reasons to remain optimistic about this industry.
I'm glad we're bringing it full circle to being optimistic about things. We're talking about a lot of challenges. I would love to just quickly get to your mindset as a leader, because the industry moves so fast. In traditional businesses, people can sit back and say, all right, I'm going to create something from nothing, or I'm going to develop this particular building or this business. I'm going to pro forma it out 5 to 7 years. Do you find it challenging to set goals that are like a year or two apart, or do you focus on 90 days?
We find it challenging to budget for the coming year. So, yeah, I mean, look, I think you have to think, both short term and long term in this industry. But yeah, I mean, we've because things are so fluid, certainly like from a planning standpoint, it can be very challenging. And, things have, you're always, for us, like when we turn on a new retail store, a new production facility, you're trying to project how something's going to perform. You're trying to figure out how you need to allocate resources to it. You're trying to build a business plan around it. You're trying to staff a new state or a market, and it doesn't always play out the way that you want. And so, it's a game of constant adjustments, I think. I mean, it's, any fast growing business, I think, has those elements, but we're in such a nascent space in some ways still. It's really still hard to predict how certain things are going to play out. So, for me, it's like less about trying to plan way out in advance, but more like tweaking and adjusting the plan along the way and trying to have maybe a set of short-term, medium-term goals, but knowing that, hey, at any given moment, I may need to make an adjustment. I may need to start to think about something differently. So it's I always say, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, and I'm sure everybody feels like this about their own industry, but it is definitely one of the more complex and challenging environments to operate in. And I think it requires like just constant attention, which is why you see a lot of people burning out and getting worn down, because the environment's so fluid that it's not the kind of business where you can go on vacation for a week and turn off your email. It's just not realistic for most people in this space. So I think. I think
people still do that. They can disengage for a week.
Maybe in Europe or something like that. But no, I think it varies from space to space, but this is definitely a very hands-on environment. And I think, for business owners in this space, you have to be very hands-on. I don't think there's even if you have a more sizable platform, you got to know the details of what's going on in your business, how markets are performing. I just don't see it as something you can really step away from that piece of it and still be successful. But yeah, it's how do you think long term in an environment like that? It's a really good question.
And that's what you have Chris and their team for, right?
Yeah.
Is to lean on them for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would echo a lot of Ankur's thoughts here. Of it's of course we want to build a healthy business for the long term, and I think our job as leaders in the industry is to provide optimism. But the other side of that coin is to also plan realistically. What can we control? What can we, to a certain degree of confidence know is going to be a reliable thing? I mean, if we're, part of Dutchie's service offering is providing payment processing. We've touched on, the challenges of being in the cannabis industry and the access to the traditional banking system. We have to, kind of have the stomach, and we have to have the rigor internally to plan for maybe massive changes there. To Ankur's point, if you can't unplug for a week, you never know what's going to happen with an entire revenue stream, for your business. So it's building, the fundamentals and the foundation of your business to be set up to weather those storms. And I think at least at Dutchie, we've done a good job of getting really just rigorous with our planning. But on the other side of that, as a technology and a service provider, our job is to anticipate. That's a big part of the value that we provide to customers like C3, is being able to understand, whether it's looking at other verticals, retail verticals, and bringing in technologies like personalization, really before that's kind of a big topic of discussion, amongst other, our competitors or the industry at large. But then even going further and saying, well, what's unique about cannabis? What are the problems that our customers face that they wouldn't even necessarily think to call us about? One of the major issues that we know exists right now, is just trying to manage the relationship between a retailer and a wholesaler, and things like trade spend, right? A wholesaler potentially discounting a purchase order because they might co-sponsor a discount with that retailer. This is not something that we at Dutchie had heard much about from our customers, until we started kind of really spending more and more time with the teams at customers like C3. And frankly, being here in Michigan, we get to see so many large operators, and our privilege that we just get to listen, right? So we don't want to understand what our customers need from us necessarily. We want to listen and understand their entire business. So a major focus for Dutchie this year is trying to help with those optimization problems of, you have an entire staff that's just dedicated to trying to figure out what vendor gives you a credit, and then a vendor trying to figure out, did you actually run that discount? These seem like really kind of point specific problems, but when you zoom out and you start collecting more and more information and talking to more customers, it's a huge issue, massive issue. So when it comes to planning, and I can't tell you what the retail environment is going to be like 2 years from now, but I can at least tell you that from a how can technology help our customers, we want to, every single quarter want to try to inch a little bit further ahead, right? Have a little bit more foresight into what's happening in the industry, so that when our customers, sit down with us and we tell them, well, here's what's on the roadmap, they smile wide and go, holy shit, I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think that you guys could help us with that. That's how all the signal that I need as a tech leader, to know that we're building something special. We're building real value.
That's awesome. Ankur, are you excited about any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're as the industry is maturing and evolving, we are trying to think about the customer experience in a different way. And so, a lot of the problems that Chris is describing, I think we do need to figure out how we're using technology and sort of the digital environment in our stores more. And when I think about like the dispensary experience right now in most places, you're walking into a store, they may have 500 SKUs, they may have 1,000 SKUs. You're often taking in a lot of things visually. You may be getting directed by a bud tender in a certain direction. But a lot of the questions I'm asking now are like, how can we communicate to the customer what our offering actually is? Meaning, what are the products that we have? What are the deals and the promos? They're getting hit with so much noise when they walk in the door. And then it's not like a grocery store or a liquor store where you can walk through the aisles and see everything visually. You don't have that same visual merchandising element. Really, most of the visual merchandising happens behind the counter. Or there's like select SKUs that are shown in that way. And so, I'm hyper focused on like, how do we like get information across to the customer better? Because I think if we do that, I think it'll make the retailers that are able to do that well will benefit and do better business, but it'll also kind of, help the customer understand the environment a little bit better. I think right now there's just so much noise. It's hard for a customer to even figure out like which retail store should I go to, which products are the right ones for me. And so you have a lot of people that default to like THC percentage or something, right? Like, or price, right? Like those are the two easiest things to look at when everything else just feels like noise. And so, I think as we figure out how to communicate with the customer better, that's going to educate them better. That's going to open the customer up to actually potentially spending more, to looking at higher quality products. Right now you have an informational mess and you have a race to the bottom that's going on as a result. And so I think, using technology like Dutchie, like how do you set yourself up to communicate well to the customer, to then have the right product assortment, to deal with your vendors correctly upstream. Like all these things are tied together, and all, in a complex business, in us for 31 stores, 6 states, like how do we build all those supply chains and those assortments and those customer experiences the right way? And how do we use technology to do that? How do we have the right people to actually manage all that technology? Because I can't tell you how many dispensaries I've walked in that have a gorgeous several $1,000 kiosk set up and the thing's not even working or set up correctly, or it's got an error message on it or whatever. And so, it's not just about having the shiny toys and all that stuff, but like then building the back end infrastructure to make sure that stuff's all working correctly. So, I think there's just when we first built our stores, like technology in the store was such a secondary thought. It was like, here's how the counter is going to be just, laid out. And, this is where our slat wall is going to be, where we're going to put the products up. And like, it was a very, very visual merchandising driven thing. It was a very old school, all the products behind the counter. Everyone's going to walk up to the POS and talk to their budtender. Well, now we see, oh shit. Well, in 40% of our transactions are on e-com, and where the person's ordering ahead, they're not even doing any shopping in the store. They just want to come in and out. Then of the remaining 60%, some of them want to come in and just shop on a kiosk quickly and get their thing and get out. Then there's another subset that may want to come to the counter, smell 10 different flower jars, have a long conversation. You need to be able to set up to like service all those customers in the ways that they want to, right? So some of that's old school and sniff the jars and all the stuff that we've been doing for a long time. But a lot of it, more than half is like, do you have the right website? Do you have the right e-com platform? Do you have the right kiosk set up when you get in the store? Is all of that set up in a way where the customer actually understands what their options are, right? So there's just a lot of, I think again, the shift is going from analog to digital, which is a weird thing to say, in 2025, but like that is where the industry really is. And a lot of us have legacy stores that may be set up in a certain way that's not really conducive to this. So then there's like, well, what physical changes are you going to make in that environment? So I think there's just like a, version 2.0, 3.0, right? We all just keep evolving, but Dutchie's got Dutchie 2.0. A lot of dispensaries need to have like just full on dispensary 2.0, right? Here's what I used to do in this box. Now I'm going to do it differently going forward, right?
And I think a big principle that's kind of, underlies all that is, just with the straight unit economics, right, of cannabis, you can't really choose a customer segment anymore. You have to be able to cater to, the person that comes in every single day and is going to buy a gram because that's their jam, and that's totally fine. They might not want efficiency. They might like that, one-to-one bud tender experience. And then you have to cater all the way to the person who just wants to, pull up curbside, get their bag of edibles, and they'll be back in a month because that's, their pace of consumption.
Yeah.
I think you have to, as a dispensary, as a retail provider, you have to figure out a system and a brand that can cater to as many types of different customer segments. I mean, I think when it was more of a green rush mentality, you had all these more, well, we're the boutique store, right? Or we're the quick shop, like convenience store model. I think you're going to see, more consolidation because those kind of just segment specific types of retail operations, they're not going to be sustainable. So you do need to build a business and build a retail experience and customer journey that can be kind of multimodal and serve lots of different types of consumers and keep them coming back. And that's absolutely a challenge. It is not easy to do. And it definitely, maybe it is retail 2.0 is kind of on the horizon.
Yeah. I mean, you're really running two businesses out of every retail store. You're running your e-com business that you're just servicing, you're fulfilling through the door, and then you're running your true in-store retail business, right? Which are really two different things. And so are you set up correctly for that? But yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of, I think, evolution in thinking and how the customers are serviced, how we approach all these problems as we move forward, or these opportunities, I guess. And again, there's just a lot of information. I keep going back to like, there's information overload, both for us as businesses in terms of, hey, did we get the vendor credit on the cart that we were supposed to get $1 rebate from the vendor, whatever. Yeah. There's complexity there and a lot of information, but then for the consumer, I think it's very noisy. I think very few consumers can actually walk into any store and actually really have a sense of what's going on. And so, yeah, I think, it's similar. I think there's a lot of similarities to alcohol retail in my view. I think, the vast majority of alcohol retailers have to cater to all different types of customers, and they've got high end products and low end products, and and then you have like a very small subset that maybe hey, I'm in a wealthy community where somebody wants, a high end wine store, so now I'll do that, and that'll work. But that's a small subset relative to what the lion's share of the activity is. And so, yeah, I think we're trying to service a wide array of customers that are ordering through different channels, with a big information problem. So it's like, I mean, technology is going to have to be the solution to a lot of this. But I also think that, like, again, you set up a kiosk and then you don't have like the sales team in the store, and the kiosk may not even work properly or maybe clunky, and then you're losing something there. So you can't just you can't rely wholly on technology either. You still need the human element. You're trying to do a lot of things at once well, and it's not easy.
Yeah, it's optimizing the experience, making it frictionless. You mentioned alcohol, so I'll open up just maybe one final thought before we close. But do you think that the state of Michigan and operators here would benefit from a minimum as it's applied in the alcohol and liquor industry? I mean, that at least there's a standard of what people can expect to make based on sales. I mean, we don't see that in Michigan. It's kind of like, you go to Chicago and a cart might cost you $60. You come to Michigan, and same cart is $4. I mean, how do people turn a profit here?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that idea talked about a lot. I don't know exactly what all the implications would be. I'd like to think we could get to a healthy equilibrium in the market without forcing that type of a structure on, but maybe that's the only way to get there. I mean, clearly there's a reason we put it in place for alcohol, right? So, and I think, I think because there's this race to the bottom happening. Now you have businesses that are struggling, that may not be viable financially anymore. You have a huge, kind of receivables issue that's now developed in the market because you have unhealthy retailers that aren't able to pay their bills. So, there is a policy question. Again, I go back to the policymakers. Do we want to have a healthier supply chain in the cannabis market here? Well, then we need to do things to encourage that, right? Maybe some of the, we should look to alcohol as a model for cannabis in some ways. I'm not saying everything that in alcohol is directly applicable, but we've been down this road before with other similar substances. Alcohol took decades to get, from a point of post-prohibition to, a fully regulated marketplace. And then even since then, it's obviously evolved a lot over, since prohibition, even till now. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly an interesting idea. I think that if we do nothing in Michigan, we're probably going to see a lot more pain and turmoil. So I don't think that, again, as a policymaker, I think the do nothing status quo is not a great solution, regardless of where your politics lie. So yeah, I think, but look, I would say, taking a step back, we wanted an open marketplace in Michigan. We wanted a competitive marketplace. We wanted a marketplace where consumer prices were low and accessibility was high. So look, we've gotten what we asked for. Now, is there going to be, when you ask for a marketplace like that, is there going to be some pain in certain segments of it? Yes, because that's the inherent nature of an open, competitive marketplace. It won't work for everybody, and some businesses are going to fail, and that's capitalism, right? So, but even within that conversation, there's degrees, and you could choose to do certain things to support a marketplace. And certainly, I think there's a lot of focus, rightfully so, on sort of bad actors and enforcement. Like, if we're going to create a regulatory framework and a licensed marketplace, let's at least, sort of protect that marketplace from bad actors. Because that, I think, part of the race to the bottom you're seeing is some of that, that activity that's happening in the industry. So, so whether it's a combination of enforcement, things like minimum pricing, there's talk of license moratoriums, like these are all different ideas that are all designed to kind of shore up the health of the supply chain. And I think that, legislators in Michigan need to be looking hard at these things to figure out what is the right solution or the right package of solutions. And I'll just note, I believe in, you can speak to this, Chris. I think that because of the way that cannabis was passed in Michigan through a ballot initiative, I think there's like a very high bar to like
change.
To make changes. I think you need bipartisan support in both houses and all that. So
75%.
So it's an uphill battle. I mean, and so it's like, it's great when things happen by popular will of the people through a ballot initiative, but then you end up with a program that's very hard to then adjust and modify later. And so we're going to see what happens. It's not clear to me if anything will happen in Michigan this year.
Yeah, I agree that something needs to change. If we want to maybe the theme of this conversation, find any level of optimism, is that state legislature, their incentives are aligned to fix it. Right. I can't recall the numbers of tax revenue that this industry has generated for the state of Michigan, but we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And if something doesn't change, that will go away. And so it is something we're looking at and going, why hasn't there been more activity here? And again, is there a unified voice? Is there a clear message coming from this industry to legislature, to the governing bodies, to say, hey, these are the real problems? I do think that if just in our state of Michigan, if we can have some consensus on maybe some of these changes, and we can go with a unified message to say, hey, we want to see maybe this work. I also think that it's slightly illogical. I think our industry's reticence to go and learn from like the alcohol industry. I certainly, my own personal opinion is that cannabis is, substantially better on the body than alcohol is. And I think there's plenty of science to back that up. But I also think we can't be so myopic to kind of the actual physical effects that we're not willing to go and learn and go, why is there a state minimum, in the alcohol industry? What did it take to get there? What did it, what harm did that cause? And I don't think I've yet seen many in our industry willing to, kind of poke their head up and learn from others, which, again, let's chalk it up to a maturity factor of this industry. But again, something that I think needs to change as well.
One quick follow up to that. Is there a state that does it well, where you say this really is a great model that other states should adopt? And I hate to kind of, but you see a lot.
Probably homers on this, but
Michigan.
I think Michigan, with obviously a lot of the changes, and there's just no way around the price compression that's happening, the competition that's rung up. But I think to what Ankur was really illustrating, Michigan in many ways did it right by kind of letting a free market blossom, and kind of letting it in many ways create and destroy itself. Michigan in many ways is still a leader, no matter what. Yes, it's not where it was maybe like 2 years ago, but I can no value in naming names, but I look at markets that have launched years after Michigan that are nowhere near where they should be, because frankly they weren't set up right. And I think hopefully as more and more markets go recreational, those governing bodies and those legislatures can take notice and look at what some successful markets like Michigan and others. Missouri I think is another good one. It's probably not a coincidence that those are your biggest markets, but yeah, it's a really interesting time to look at and study what was set up right, what was set up wrong, and hopefully we can, as an industry right now, as more markets approach recreational and even medical laws being passed, we can help influence setting those markets up the right way.
Yeah, and I would just say again, there's just choices that for to be made always. Meaning, there are markets like Missouri that may have healthier industries, but they also have a limited number of licenses, which means not everybody can enter the industry and build a business in that state. And so, I think in Michigan we chose from a policy standpoint or ballot initiative to allow anyone that wanted to enter, assuming you can meet minimum requirements and pass certain background requirements, that you can get a license and you can be in the industry. Places like Missouri that is very highly regarded, there's only 60 cultivation licenses. There's only 200 or so retail licenses. And so I think there's always that policy question. Do we want to make it truly an open market and, kind of capitalism at its, most basic form, where everyone can come in and everyone can compete? Some will win, some will lose. Or do we want to set up a more limited system where you either award licenses through merit or through a lottery? Some people come in and buy up licenses that have access to capital. There's a lot of debate around what's the right and fair way to approach this. But I think ultimately, the reality is if you want to go open market, where anyone can enter, then it's going to look a lot like Michigan. It's going to be very competitive, and some businesses will fail and some will succeed. If you want to have a more restrictive framework where not everybody can enter, then you may end up with a bit of a healthier industry environment because you're not allowing sort of the natural level of competition to develop. And so, it's like going back to Econ 101 type of stuff, right? It's like, what do we want to do? How do we want to approach it? Do we, what are the policy preferences that we have? And by the way, that's why we do it state by state, because not every state's going to look at this the same way, right? And I think that's good. I think that's the beauty of, federalism in the American system, is let every state market develop based on that state's policy preferences, but also understand that the more open you make it, the more competitive it's going to be. The more restrictive you make it, the less everyone's going to be able to participate in that industry. These are just choices that we have to make. So, I'd still pick a Michigan really almost over any place. Like, let it be open, let it be competitive, and let the best companies win.
I do hope some policymakers got a chance to hear at least snippets of this conversation, just to understand that there's some challenges, but that all is well. We're optimistic, but there's a lot more to do. And part of that is having the conversation and the relationships. I hope they're open-minded about that, and we'll continue to work together nationally, locally, statewide. I just think that there's a lot good to come out of collaboration and being strategic and thoughtful about that. So, Chris Ostrowski, CTO, co-founder of Dutchie, Ankur Rungta, co-founder and CEO of C3 Industries, tremendous businesses, perspectives. I admire the hell out of you guys a lot, and I just appreciate just a couple minutes and insights and on all things today. So appreciate you guys very much.
Well, and thank you, Derek, for having us on. Venues like this are incredibly important. And obviously your commitment to the cannabis industry, in Michigan and otherwise, has been a key part of us continuing to have a healthy industry and continue to make progress. So, thanks for continuing to do what you do.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate
I appreciate you having us. And I want you to keep highlighting Michigan companies. I think we need to make more of an impact on the national cannabis dialogue. And I think it's these types of conversations that will do that. So I'm excited to see who else you bring on.
Let's do more. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. We'll see you soon on the next episode of the Power Connector podcast.